Welcome back to What Problem Are You Solving? The greatest podcast in the world that tells you if once you figure out what problem are you solving, then you figure out what pays. So we've got a huge crowd today. We'll skip over the pleasantries, but welcome back to Adam and Ty and myself, and welcome for our new guests, Jack, Michael, and Paul. So this will be fun. I'm looking forward to a little out of sorts, out of cycle. Um, we are on a Thursday right now, which is it feels so weird. Like my ESTJ brain can't wrap my head around a different time, a different date. This is so it hurts my head. So since
Well,
Adam
I
already broke my skull open, yeah,
hey
My
John,
job.
we didn't have our music. I was like, where's the music never came through. So I was
the
kind
music
of
never came through.
confused. No, but that's okay.
Oh,
We're here now, and we are live.
it's Adam's fault. Adam, how you doing?
Well, good.
Good, great, fine.
I tell the kids I work with, ice cream is good, right? I need a better descriptor than I'm good.
More than good.
That's right. But go ahead. I'm sorry, Jack. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I
Oh,
learned a long time ago that in the US, if you say good, it means bad, and amazing is like okay, and something like absolutely brilliant is if you're actually great. So I'm gonna go with great.
Great.
there you go. Awesome.
Love it.
That's good.
How about you, Michael?
I grew up with if you claim decent, that's about as good as you should. Otherwise, people are going to wonder why are you doing better than me. So I always hedge my bets. But honestly, it's been a great morning, and I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Love it. And Paul.
Well, I'm from New York, but I've been in California for a decade, so I'm kind of torn between the two extremes in the US for that. But I'm going to go with awesome, dude.
Isn't that a Neil Diamond song? I didn't know. I actually didn't know you were from New York.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, that goes way back now.
All right, ask these guys a question, then I'll add some structure.
Well, no, I want to hear why are problem discovery interviews so hard, Adam? What gave you the idea for this episode?
All right, so 10, maybe 12 years ago, it was like everyone should be doing customer interviews. That's the answer to failed startups. People get out of the building. Credit Steve Blank, Eric Ries, Ash. Then at some point, and we had, keep going down the credit list. So we don't. There was what was that? Rigby. You remember in Silicon Valley when they didn't want to keep saying the same thing over again, so they were like, Richard is a blank, but so they kept saying Rigby. All right, credit to all the people. 10 years ago, customer discovery, get out of the building, kind of solved for that false positive problem where everyone thinks your idea is awesome. And then you go build it. Fast forward to today, you see people that are finally doing interviews. They're doing 100 of them.
Following the process.
Which is very general. Well, that's sort of one of the things I want to. There are a bunch of different processes out there. Each person sort of has their own flavor, which that's the kind of the structure I want to walk through in terms of who you're going to talk to, roughly your persona, where you're going to find them at the airport. We'll talk about that. What are you going to ask them? Are you asking non-leading questions? And then do you have time to analyze and make, we've talked on this show about, the interpretation piece, which is separate from then the decision piece. It sounds so, are we allowed to curse on Thursdays? No. Mondays, I know we can't curse.
Paul overrides, so no.
Still seems so simple. I think 10 years ago was more of a motivation and a mindset problem. Why would I talk to customer? I think that has been overcome to some degree. Now it's like more of a process, a quality, and a sort of check the box problem. Like there's a couple different things here. So first I'm seeing people are doing 100 interviews and just kind of moving on. I'm seeing no continuity. Like the interviews are not showing up in teams, whether I work with them or not. Like 2 years later, whether it's from the customer discovery program to the MVP program, there's no continuity, or whether it's just like even teams that are getting funding or have a product, it's not being informed by what problem. Let yourself an answer. What problem are you solving? It's fascinating, but it's been my white whale for 10 years. So yeah, I want to see, we introduced this series. Oh, this is awesome. We got Nakeem. So we introduced this series where we're at least going to try to evaluate in a standardized way over 2025, once a month, one founder who has done the interviews, and we can apply a criteria. Did this person, are they talking to the right people? Are they asking the right questions? Are they interpreting the data? And are they making a reasonable decision from the data? And that should be easy to judge. I think it's going to be an exciting format. And then we can talk about, if we agree on the answers to those questions. This is sort of a prequel to what even are the options of, yeah, we can start right there. I mean, who do you talk to? Step one, we've had Ash on the show. We've been fortunate enough to have Bob Mesta on the show. Like, how do you even define? Do you start with a leaner canvas? Do you start with a business model canvas? Do you just say, problem human, problem customer? Like right away it's broken. So let's just start there. Let's spend 10 minutes each and we'll just go through those steps. How do you determine, if you had a founder tomorrow and we're going to do this, we're going to test this live on, I don't want to keep plugging, December 9th, we're going to test this with real founders. But if a founder walks into your office and they have an idea, obviously we were trying to fall in love with the problem, not the solution. But most ideas come from a solution or an idea or, So to me, it's problem and customer. Who are you going to talk to? But even that gets broken. There's a couple different segments it could be. It's a two-sided market. It's, I use the EdTech example. You talk to the teachers, you talk to the parents, you talk to the buyers, you talk to the customer, talking about what pays versus what problem you're solving. I'm rambling. Ty's going to look at me funny in a second. He's looking down, but he's going to look at me funny. So, yes, I want to see if we can come up with some standard, even if we don't agree on the actual journey. There's only a limited number of steps, which I feel like has been the one thing I've articulated clearly over the last year, which is who are you going to talk to? Where are you going to find them? What are you going to ask them? Now you have a data set. How many are you going to talk to? I think we've answered 5 to 10 at a time. 100's too many to just do blind. What does the data say? Is separate from the decision, and then what decision, whether it's pivot, persevere, or pause, not K. But even within those steps, there's a lot of different options and a lot of different styles. So I at least want to finish this divergent exercise of all the different ways of even figuring out who should I talk to first. Paolo, my co-author, and he's like, oh, you got to talk to the demand side. I'm like, well, you got to talk to the supply, or I think it was actually reversed in this case. I think demand side, he was like supply side. Or, you got to talk to the customer first, not the user first. Or so like, even that's a debate. And then it's like, where do you find them? We told our friend John Seacrest, this is a healthy debate, but like, do you do inbound? Even Craig Elias, who might be here, like, do you put out a landing page and bring people in to attract to a solution or a problem or a value proposition, or do you just go out onto the street and talk to them, which brings other issues of trust and safety for certain people. What questions do you ask them? Do you just read the mom test? How do you evaluate that they're asking the right questions? All right, so we're going to walk through each step. I'm good.
It's interesting that you would say that, Adam, because the thing that I wasn't looking down, because I think you're wrong, it's not that you put this proposition out.
Is that him or is that me?
That is, we got frozen Ty. That's all right. It's getting cool. It's the time of year. Welcome, Nakeem. Thanks for sliding in. While you are getting set up, let's head over to Michael to start with. Where would you start? What would you recommend to a founder? It's day zero. What do they do?
Well, I always start with identifying the risky assumptions. And I feel like this is the first step where things get really messy and you get into a complex decision tree where we're trying to figure out what exactly we need to learn first. And so I feel like the challenge is getting the founder into the mindset of a scientist doing experiments and rather than having a prescribed, and I think this is where a lot of the challenge lies in my work, having a prescribed process that each founder can go through, is right from the very beginning, based on their business model and a lot of other factors, the experiments are going to look different, even if it's, like pure customer discovery. And that's where my mind is playing right now, is thinking about all the different founders that I've worked with, and even at the very beginning, at the first step, maybe we map out a business model canvas. Like when we're trying to do this in a compressed atmosphere at Startup Weekend, we have an hour. You've got to figure out a hypothetical business model canvas. Now identify your risky assumptions. Now, which one's the riskiest? Let's go test that. Figuring out who you're going to talk to, and even just what is the medium of the channel. Like we're trying to force people to do face-to-face, in-person things, and teach them how to leverage the body language and the tone of voice and all of that. And it's the furthest thing away from an online survey, but what if you can't do that? We're giving them a process and saying, you've got to do it this way, because we know that that is ideal, but no founder's journey is ideal. Every founder is going to have a different place. So how do we give them a hierarchy of preferences and say, if you can't do it face to face, then go for a video. Try to see their face, even if it's remote. If you can't do that, go for an audio. Make it a real-time call. And then all the way in at the end of the spectrum, we're doing an experiment where it's an online survey and the results are miserable. But just I'm thinking in that very
Everybody
first
loves
moment,
surveys.
yeah, it's true. Ty, we lost you right when you were about to give us the golden nugget. You froze.
Oh my God! Sometimes this computer that I have works, other times it doesn't. But what I was reacting to was Adam saying you have a founder comes into your room, into your office, and says, "Hey, I have this thing," and they are reacting to, I believe, they're reacting to something they see out in the environment, and they're like, "I know I can solve this. I got the thing to make this happen." And following a gentleman that John and I have used his work, his name is Roger Martin. And Roger has this thing where he talks about the idea of strategy, right? And he said the one kind of question that you always want to ask in terms of strategy is, cool, if that's the thing, what must be true, right? So if I can
must be
understand
true.
what must be true.
Not what could sort of be true or what's a nice to have. No, what must be true.
In order for this thing to work, these are the conditions for these to work. Because basically, it is a way for them to be explicit about the business models that's in their head, right? And that they can't write down. It's just like, well, this has to happen, this has to happen, this has to happen. And my sense is that if you can get them to be explicit about that, then you can say, well, if that's who do you go and talk to about that? Well, what would you like to know to see whether or not those things happen?
They're your assumptions. Yep.
Exactly. Because if this isn't true, if that must be true, what are the assumptions behind this must be true? And now you can start to unpack that, because you can get an assumption, you can create a hypothesis, a whole bunch of a crap ton of questions. But I never want to assume that I know everything, because I think that that's presumptuous on my part. But I think that they come to folks like us because they appreciate the way we think. And the only thing that I have to offer is like, okay, cool. What it has to happen in order for you to make that happen, make that valuable, so somebody would want to buy it, and then just crank out those things. And then I tell them, I learned this from John as the engineer. Between the two of us, there are no ties. One to end, and nothing can be a tie. Now they go, oh my God, well, all of these are important. No,
nope, they're not all important.
Not true.
Which one's more important? Or
and if
Jack,
like Jenga, if you pull that, and that assumption doesn't work, the entire Jenga block structure falls down, right?
Mm-hmm.
And here we go again. Oh, okay. Whew.
I agree. Jack, do you agree with what Michael said?
Yeah.
Or would you take a different take?
Well, the funny thing is, I met John Segrest for the first time 2016 and then 2017 in Seattle, and he recommended me to buy Running Lean, and he emphasized that, not only you do this lean canvas, but you also have to highlight these riskiest assumptions. So I did that even before I started the interview. So I agree. But yeah, what else was there for me to agree or disagree?
What would you recommend to a new founder? Again, would you do that again? Or would you do something different if you were starting over again?
Yeah, I mean, I start with lean canvas and try to figure out my assumption on like the ideal customer profile and the buyer persona but not being too rigid, understanding it's like an iterative process, and then figuring out what are the known unknowns and unknown unknowns. Well, of course, you can't know the unknown unknowns, but just understanding that you have those. And then I think I would say that start with understanding the problem and then figure out a problem solution fit where you just sell something and you can solve the problem, but it's not scalable. And if you don't reach that, then there's no chance for you to do any scaling.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the things. But yeah, definitely like go and interview real people and ideally face to face. And the second option is video. Definitely surveys. If you have to do surveys, let's say with the first interviews, then I think you're already hitting a problem. Like you have to find people to discuss with, at least on a video, if not face to face.
I like it. Paul, how about you? Why are problem discovery interviews so hard?
Oh, you had to ask the question, and then that really gets me started. So I'll give you a few perspectives on this. And so one of them, just going off of what I forget who mentioned when they were talking about, well, like, surveys, and I think we kind of laugh at surveys, or we're very skeptical of them. Still used a lot, or it's still a go-to that I find a lot of people mention. And like my classic example of surveys going wrong, that I was just actually talking about is, when McKinsey Consulting ran like 5,000 or 6,000 surveys with people for AT&T to determine if there's a market for mobile phones. So this is like 40 years ago. And I've spoken to two people who were in the room when that presentation was delivered, and
Wow.
like, wow, we're like 99% certain nobody wants this. Actually, it's too small of a market. You should just exit. And so smart people go down that path, right? Hey, we've got a ton of data. Nobody wants this thing. There actually is no problem, right? I've got a phone like in my office and at home. Why would I need one for like walking around? This is ridiculous. So one of the changes in my perspective over the last few years has been not necessarily only thinking about what's the problem to solve, but also looking at what is this new opportunity that might be emerging. And the founder kind of identifies, hey, there's this new capability, this new business model is being unlocked. I can actually build for something. Those future customers don't necessarily think there's a problem here. But as I'm learning about their day and their life, I can actually uncover something they don't realize. So that probably connects to the next piece. And I think like all of you, like I have a lot of founders who I think I'm training to go and do these discovery interviews. And, I would kind of test it out, one-on-one with them, but I didn't actually know what they were doing out in the field. Something I started doing, and I should really do more of this, is what I call the gonzo interview. So that's when I pretend I'm part of their team. I don't run the interview for them, but I just tag along and I kind of like take notes. Maybe I nod once in a while. And then afterwards I can debrief with them and say, what were you doing? You kept asking them all these hypothetical future, like leading questions. Like, didn't we just say we weren't going to do that? Or like, oh, hey, I thought this was a good, point that they brought up. Why didn't you dig into that? Purely to give that kind of coaching in a way that you can't get otherwise. So I actually, I also, something I've changed my mind about, and this actually comes from Adam and one of his colleagues, Mike Vladimir. I used to be a little negative on recording interviews, and they've actually started to change my mind about that. The good thing about that, even if you just do it like once in a while, the good thing is like, hey, you can go and revisit that, or you can show it to like me or like one of you, and you can say, oh, I didn't realize that I was actually doing the opposite of what I thought I was doing, right? Or, hey, they gave me these clues and I completely missed it. So
Right.
These discovery interviews, it's, there's a lot to get a hang of. It's, they seem very simple, but it's tough to do them well. And when I used to do this, and like the background is me, I teach, at a university, but I've also run like 4 different startup accelerators, over the years. one of the big learnings for me has been what I thought I was talking about, or the training I thought I was doing, and we're on the same page, the founders and I realized in actually sitting in on those interviews, we're actually not necessarily talking about the same thing. So I don't know, that was a lot. I'll stop.
No, I like it.
No, that was perfect. That was this. I mean, I want to hear from all of you. That's why we invited you all here. But I think I try not to get too meta with this, but the riskiest assumption about customer interviews is that you are doing it properly. Because if you're not, none of the data matters, none of the decision-making matters, and doing more of them doesn't do anything either. So I agree. I'd like to go back. A lot of people I've had this conversation with go back to the business model canvas. And yes, it's important. I'm not just saying go get eyeballs and, only focus on desirability. But it's funny because even on this podcast, what pays is desirability. What problem are you solving? And what pays is viability. Who's your customer? And I agree that both of those things are important, but they're separate. I feel like viability gets thrown into this and conflated right away. And like, we're not closing the loop, like, on the problem and the technique, because we're not going out in the field. There's no feedback cycle. We're teaching it, and we're taking the founder's kind of word for it because there's some presentation or some demo or that we have to get on to the next thing. But I actually think right now, as of today, that the weakest link here is technique. And are you even asking the right question? And you can learn so much just by listening to, say, 5 interviews, 20 minutes each. So what is that? 100 minutes. Yes, someone has to review them. So in a one-to-many setting like Paul's class, like, do you do it for everyone, or do you just take, focus on one person, and then hopefully then the teams listen to that interview, to that teaching. But yeah, I think the riskiest assumption right now is when I say, are you talking to the right people? Are you using the right technique? And
are you doing good problem discovery? Yeah.
Are you asking the right question? Because
so Nakeem, how would you, any tips and tricks that you found to solve that problem?
Actually, this is the kind of 3 things that I realized because I'm an anthropology student from the anthropological standpoint.
See, I love that.
3 things. It's just going to reiterate a lot of the things you guys said. Is first, I'll say like the relationship to data, right? It wasn't until like this last cohort where we forced the founders to like record their interviews, and then we get a chance to look at it. Like there's in anthropology, there are methods when you approach data, and it allows you to reduce to pretty much what holds true, I guess. So I think there's an opportunity there to teach founders and the methods of anthropology to almost like aggregate that data and reduce it to what the people are actually really saying. That's one. I feel like the relationship with data was a piece that was missing. 2 is, for example, when they come to my office, well, I don't have an office, but when we have our first meeting, the first thing I tell them is, and you guys mentioned assumptions and stuff like that, it's who are you trying to understand, especially from the anthropological perspective. It's who are you trying to understand, and what is their world, right? It's connecting the forest to the trees. So who are you trying to understand? What are your assumptions about that? And what are they trying to achieve, and what's stopping them from achieving that? So it's almost like asking from a holistic perspective, which opens up like the field to a whole bunch of data that the founder might not even, we're not thinking that they were looking at. And then that kind of where the third one is fostering the explorer's mindset, where a lot of times you're not going to get like the answer you were looking for, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
Right?
How about it?
Amassing a lot of data. And that's like the circle where now your relationship to data allows you to get into it, reduce it to what the customer is saying. So it's like a flywheel of who are you trying to understand?
No, I like that. There's a coworker of Ty and I who said the goal is not to be right, but to get it right.
Yes.
And that's, man, like I've heard the theme so far today of like intellectual humility, like just realizing you don't know everything, and like get out of your own way, stop trying to just come in with a solution, and actually just start focusing on the problem and desirability. So, there's another word that you said, Nakeem, that I like is, what are they trying to achieve?
Mhm.
That's a good one. I'm going to steal that one because I'm a big fan. Again, I'm a recovering engineer. I used to always just say, here's the solution. Why don't you like it? And once I start getting into, well, what job to be done, or what outcome are you trying to get to?
Bingo.
What do you want them to do? Like, not the goal of them is not to use your product. The goal of the user is to do something that makes the user more awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so if you can figure out what that is, what the outcome is that they're trying to get to, and it's like it's like the layer of the onion deeper than most people realize, right? So if you're creating a dating app, the outcome is not to match people up. That's an output, right? The outcome is they want to live, they want to be happy and have the strong relationship and have strong feelings for another human being, right? That's what you're selling. That's what you're trying to actually solve for them. Not, can I match someone that has similar interests? And
I think Jack was trying to say something, because I think Jack was on it earlier. Yep.
Yeah, one of the things I've been thinking is that once you understand what they're trying to achieve, then asking a question like, how about if you like properly overachieved, what would it look like? Because sometimes these people are just so focused on the nitty gritty and they don't, step outside of the box, because they just might be, trying to accomplish a task, but that task is serving a greater purpose in a company strategy or whatever. And you might have a superior, and that person, you might know that person's goals. And you know that if I could achieve something even greater, that person would be even happier. So just trying to like 2x, 5x, hypothetically. And there's this great podcast episode, I think it's in Starting Greatness by Mike Mabels Jr. or Reid Hoffman podcast, whatever it is. But their Airbnb guys explain how they thought about 10-star customer experience. So what would 5-star look like, but 6-star, 7-star? And then, 10 stars is obviously like impossible, but that would mean that if you go to New York and you land and you have Beatles in the airport, so that's like ridiculous. But when you go that far and then you start, coming back, and then you understand the 7 stars, you're way higher than the 5 stars you may have been initially like going for.
So I thought you were going to go this here, Jack. And yes, because you said something about problem solution. I think problem solution is different. What I try to get people, the folks that I deal with, the problem solution and product market are two different things, right? And so if you have your solution and the product could be completely different, right? They could be completely different. And so if I understand a solution, that's, to John's point, that's the output. The product market is the outcome. I can do these things. I need to be able to shop. I have a problem with my online banking. Great. The solution is a better app, but that doesn't necessarily mean the product. They are not necessarily tied. But if I can get to the solution, it'll lead to a great product. But I got to understand the solution that to their heartache, like their pain. And I can build a great product. That's easy. To your point, I like this over expectation idea, Jack. Thank you. I'm gonna steal that one too. You saw John do like this. Oh, yeah, me too.
So, Michael, is it as simple as looking for pains and gains, or is there more to it than that?
What is the customer discovery? Is
sure.
I keep thinking we've mentioned several times amounts of interviews like 100, 150, and with the implication, I think, that people say these numbers like that's impressive and it means we've done it right. And I feel like on the ground in practice, what it normally looks like is 5 interviews, and then we need to refactor and we realize our questions are wrong. And I want to make sure that we're giving off an accurate representation of what this should look like on the ground. From my perspective, I don't really need to choose between supply and demand side. If I'm doing 5 interviews with each and then thinking about what have I learned from each, because I'm trying to understand all sides of an equation at the same time. And I really think you have to take on that scientific mindset rather than saying, do I have a process that I can follow over and over and over and over up to 150 times? you're just not going to get any results. And that's not what it ever looks like in practice if you're doing it well. You have to be really versatile. So it's not simple. It's messy and it's counterintuitive because you're learning behavioral psychology and human nature. You're digging into that stuff and trying to figure out what it is. I don't know that we can give a simple process to people. It's never as simple as. I don't think there's any answer to that question at all, other than you are constantly and iteratively figuring out what the human experience is on every side of the equation.
I agree with you. I agree with all of that. It's never as simple, especially. I'm trying to thread this in my head, and I want to go back to what Nakeem said about who are we trying to understand, okay? And then focusing even before problem solution fit, it's like, or product market fit, it's like human objective fit, okay? Full stop. Then to your point, you see that there's multiple different, I think a lot of times, and this just happened at an accelerator in Michigan, and I can name it, Optimize, great program. It's like you have a bunch of different stakeholders. And I think if Craig Elias were on the call, I don't like to talk for other people, but he talks about the F word. Don't get nervous, John, it's focus. And I myself have been guilty of this. Like, just pick the one, what problem are you solving? Who are you solving for? I agree with you that at some point there's always like 5 or 6 different options. And what's beautiful, as much as you can't force someone into a process, this piece we keep coming back to about technique and are you at least getting better? You don't actually need to be focused. You can be doing 2 or 3 interviews on 5 different segments. And at least there's a binary judgment. And this is what we're going to test next year. We're going to do it 10 times in a row. And all the mentors should at least agree. Are you talking to the right people? Well, I'm talking to 5 or 6 different people. Okay, fine. Are you at least acknowledging that you want to learn different things from each of them? To me, is the right answer to those questions. That they're different, at least. One of them you want to learn their willingness to pay. One of them you want to learn their environment. One of them you want to learn something else. Then there's an objective step where a person is capable of asking good questions or not. And that is not dependent on focus. And I think it is a stage gate. I think at some point, nothing else matters after that. It doesn't matter who they're talking to. I used to think it was completely mattered who you're talking to. I agree. Whether it's 5 interviews or 100, if you're still asking bad questions, nothing else matters. And I think that there is now this sort of linear process of any kind of canvas you use. Tell me who you want to learn about. How are you going to learn about them? I'm going to ask them good questions. And until those 2 conditions are met, your data is irrelevant. Your customer is irrelevant. Your product is irrelevant. That's what I think.
So, Nakeem, where are you at school? What school do you teach at?
Wayne State. Well, I don't teach. I'm a student, but I'm at Wayne State University.
All right, so you're up at Wayne State.
You teach.
And so,
you teach?
Well, customer discovery in some ways, yeah.
Cool. So, as you were saying what you were saying, Adam, it made me go back to this idea of anthropology and this idea of Schotzen, right? Schotzen being beginner's mind. I think that what we're fighting against, gents, is this idea that we are completely unbiased, that the questions we're going to ask, that they're completely unbiased. We're just going to go and I'm just going to ask unbiased questions. And I don't think we can do that. It is Schrodinger's, it's Heisenberg uncertainty. You touch it, you influence it. But my sense is that if you have the appropriate amount of training and maturity, right? There's a training issue. There's a way that you do it functionally. And then there's the sense of humility, the beginner's mind that the founder needs to be able to hold on to be able to say, I am listening, I'm tamping down my bias and acknowledging it at the same time, right? So you have to acknowledge and manage your bias and manage the voice in your head. Like, they don't know what they're talking about. They're just stupid. They don't know what they're talking about. They're just stupid. If you can do that, then you can avail yourself as the interviewer, as the person who's asking, trying to unpack this thing, to all new kinds of discoveries. I'm not a therapist, and I don't pretend to be one, but I've been trained in organizational dynamics stuff where I've had to learn to listen to the voice in my head to give me evidence of what's going on in the room, right? If I get sleepy, it's evidence. If I get music, there's a song that's playing in my head, it's evidence. And I think that unlike what we do in the customer discovery interviews, and what I do I do group work, right? I need to be able to pay attention to the questions if I'm doing the customer discovery, and not hold them in advance of the conversation, and not so far push them back that I don't pay attention. I'll stop with this. F. Scott Fitzgerald said that the true hallmark of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold I'm paraphrasing, two opposing ideas at the same time in the mind without deferencing one for the other. And if you can do that, now you have the chance to be brilliant in the conversation, and not just, well, they're just stupid, or I trust everything they just said. Just a thought.
Yeah, Paul, how do you handle that? How do you handle that balance between having your own bias coming in and then being open to explore new ideas from them when you're doing customer discovery?
So I am not the customer for most things, almost anything. So I hopefully, that, I mean, there's good and bad, with that, because, I also maybe over-index on, well, other people are also like me. But I think a lot of what has already, been said, fits with that. So trying to go at this with a beginner's mind, which is very difficult, but it's also why, like, there's a lot of value in having someone from, outside an industry, do this process. There's also a lot of value in, some of those first, maybe like very intuitive, directions that we might want to go in before actually any of this process. There's a lot, I mean, there can be a lot of value in, just that spark that you get, and then it leads you down a direction. Of course, you still have to figure out, is there a market? Is there a customer? How you would potentially bring something to market? But probably one of the things that I have, I don't necessarily have a great process for doing this, other than like trying to stay, like, in some ways uneducated about what the one correct way of doing something is, but just being comfortable with being surprised.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of examples.
I'll build on that because Ty taught me the word curious. Be curious, right? So even if you think you know what the answer is, just still be present in the moment, and really be asking follow-up questions, Socratic questions, just to dig a little bit deeper, or if they, if their body reactions are a little bit around something, or they're, they get excited or they get really angry about something. Cool. Hey, tell me more about that. What's going on there? Because there's something behind the surface that you're not saying, or you're not doing. So, yeah, being curious is amazing.
My team that I was on with John, he used to say, because of my training, say more about that. And he was like, oh, here goes Ty would say more about that. And about 3 or 4 months into it, they were like, yeah, that's kind of effective just to say, so say more about that. And people are like, well, I'm glad that you asked. And they'll just blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, that's actually an anthropologist had one of the most effective probes, the Tell Me More probe,
Wow.
And that just leads into a whole thing. And I like the aspect of being like okay with being surprised, because that's where bias comes in. When you're too biased, that surprise, you might not even see it, right? Because you're kind of in your own thoughts and your own, what you believe. So I like that a lot.
How many of you are familiar with, I'm sorry, go ahead, Paul, my fault.
Oh, just going to add one thing, which is, that idea that I think everyone in some way has of, oh, well, this is just the way the world is. It's not like that's not going to change. I can't do something about that. Then having somebody come in, whether you're asking like, well, tell me more about that. Like what, like, why do you like see it that way? Or why is that the assumption? But like being able to uncover that someone maybe is just assuming, oh, well, this is just, the way it is. I can't actually solve this. That's just the way we have to do it. And then, the founder coming in with, this new solution that actually, the customer, again, is not really aware that, oh, like their life could be better. And, this future thing that, is yet to be built could actually change them from this, this current state of that's just the way it is to like, oh, I have this improvement in my life.
I agree with what Simon just posted. How many of you all remember, if you're in the States, you may have, it was on the Discovery Channel called The Mythbusters. Do you remember that show, the TV show, The Mythbusters? All right, cool. Jack knows about Mythbusters. What I like is that here you have a couple of guys who talk about science. They're not scientists, and I think this is an important conversation. They talk about science. And I describe, when I work with startups, it's like everything you ever need to learn about this, realistically, you learned in fourth grade science class, right? I saw something, I made a guess, I created an experiment, I ran some data. Did it tell me yes, no, indifferent, right? But the part that I liked about with Mythbusters, they said their definition of science was, well, that's interesting, right? The ability to stay surprised and not expect what I'm looking for, but having the unexpected tell me more about what's going on than what I suggested, which is fourth grade science, right? Simple to me.
So should the number one data point when they're presenting their interviews be what were you most surprised about? If you had to ask,
I agree. Yep.
If you had to ask one question when they come back to class or report out on their interview, because we were going down the technique piece, which I want to circle back to, because I think there needs to be interventions on asking. If there's one takeaway for me, yes, it's like you need to remove the bias. The bias is removed by technique and practice, and until you get over that, nothing else matters. So the data is irrelevant. But I do think one way of getting there in the intervention is, of course, what questions were you asking and being able to get out in the field or listen to the recording. But the other cheat code for that is just what was most surprising to you? I think that's the single most powerful question you can ask, other than like, what did you learn? Like, so what would you ask the founder? Say you had access to their technique and you could just kind of say you should have asked this follow-on question or you weren't curious. But like, one thing to me on observing them is like, if you're convincing them that they're wrong, if the interviewee is trying to convince the customer or the person they're interviewing, that's an immediate like bad technique. Although some of these things I understand are fluid, but like that's bad technique. So assuming we agree on the technique and the anthropology side, founder comes back in the room after everything you taught them. It's the first question each of you asked the founder.
First thing comes to mind though is
one single
go ahead.
interview.
Yeah, well, from one single interview, because I like the what surprised you, but I also would ask the corollary, well, like, what did they tell you that you didn't like, right? Not so what surprised you in a good way, but then the opposite way as well. Where were you like shocked? I guess is a better way of putting it. Like, oh, I didn't expect them to tell me that, that they didn't have that problem, right? And I would want to pull that thread a little bit. So that's where I would also be curious there. And then I always have them ask, one of their last interview questions should be, what didn't I ask you, right? Or because as I'm interviewing you, there's probably something I'm way off, and I like to let people have that space that gives the other person the opportunity to jump in and say, well, you forgot to actually ask me, what do I do when it rains instead of when it's sunny? Oh, yeah, I guess you're right. Never thought about that, right? So those are little things that let the customer discovery interview go off track, but in a good way, in a way that inspires these new ideas. Anyone else agree with that or have a different technique?
I have a thought. So I usually one of the things I use to set up the customer discovery process is the definition, which we talked about a few months ago, of the early adopter, and drilling all the way down to that level where we're looking for people who are actively trying to solve the problem, right? And so when we go out interviewing people, one of the first things that we can include is some kind of qualifying question to discover whether that characterizes their experience of having and solving the problem. And so to correlate with that, one of the questions that I ask people first when they come back is, what evidence did you find that they have actively tried to solve this problem? How have they paid personally in time, dollars, social capital, what have you? Are they even aware of who you think are your direct or indirect competition? And if they say no to all of that, I wonder why they continued interviewing them.
Yeah, I want to hear from everyone. That's just, I'll insert the, if John Seacrest and Craig were here, and that this qualification and this strict, like, you're not even qualified for the interview, so I'm going to move on. I do think there's a place where if you're truly doing customer discovery or problem discovery, not problem validation, that there is a place to then learn, like, oh, I'm already here, I might as well kind of ask what I didn't ask, or what else is frustrating. And if you're truly in discovery mode. But I agree, this is a very important piece that we're going to keep coming back to. This is why I believe, John, you're in the thread, Michael, so I'm not talking about John behind his back. You were there, like, where even does it make sense to qualify this person? And I agree with both sides. Like, if you're objective in the interview, who do I want to learn from, or who do I want to understand? I only want to understand people that have the problem and are actively trying to solve it. Then yes, then it's a hard qualification. And if your biggest risk is not only on desirability but on viability, and you're saying this is the minimum, this is how much time I have, it's a different criteria. And so, yeah. All right, keep going.
Go ahead and unmute, Jack. Just jump right in.
Yeah, one thing I realized during my interviews recently is that I started asking questions like, how does your problem affect other people around you? Because let's say you spend half an hour per day solving the problem, but if at the same time you keep asking other people to help you for 15 minutes every day, then that's actually 45 minutes. And then the other person is distracted. And I was interviewing developers, and if a developer is in a flow and that gets distracted, the distraction might be 15 minutes, but it might take another 30 minutes to get back to the flow. So this is something I learned when I was in sales, selling mobile subscriptions. Like, okay, I'm not only selling to you, but what about your family and people around you, your parents, whatever. So just to point that out.
Yeah, that's interesting. There was an old IT system that I worked with years ago, and it took so long to boot up in the morning. It took like 10 minutes to boot up. And so what most people did in the office was, they turned the computer on, and then everyone went to the coffee machine, right? And so they actually got work done, the whole like water cooler talking at the coffee machine while the computers are going on. So if you made the computers faster, there'd be less networking and peering. So I like how you said, like, how does it affect the other people around you as well?
Yeah, it makes me think about in the conversation, and thank you, Jack, this is useful, that the job to be done, so Clay Christensen's job to be done framework, it's not just the functional, but the social emotional jobs to be done of the person who's trying to get something done, number one. And I think the network effects, we don't consider those often enough. Like, what's the upstream impact and what's the downstream impact of a problem? I got buffered of the upstream and downstream impacts of the job to be done as you're doing your customer discovery. I think is an important idea that I don't all the time, particularly I can do it with some of the startups that I work with. Others didn't think about that, but that's useful. Thank you.
I guess for me, one interview, and then we went out there, we worked on a question, we worked on the methods and everything. It's, what did you expect? What did you learn that you did not expect to learn? And was your assumption simple? Was your assumption validated or broken? I think that would be like my first things to kind of check the box with them. And going back to the social and emotional, that's something that I think they have to cue into, right? Because a lot of times that's where the problem lies, right? In that social and emotional, right? And in reverence to what they're trying to achieve. So I think that's where like the detail and the meat and a lot of it lies. So if yeah, I'll stop there.
Could I ask you all a question that's related to this that I have struggled with when going through this process with founders? So, and this is whether they are like startup founders who have quit their jobs and they're just going for it, or, you know, when I also am teaching a class, maybe it's more extreme in the class because the semester ends in 15 weeks, right? And, you know, one of the classes that I teach where, I mean, they do apply in with a concept. So it's not like we're kind of using that first month to like get to an idea. But the problem is, well, I don't want you to tell me, you know, in week 6, you know, after I come back from an interview that, oh, I should actually do something else. What am I going to do? Like, I'm going to have to like scramble to do the next thing. So, but I see echoes of that with like the full-time founder as well. Like, I'm just passionate about, I want to do this. Like, I don't care that I'm getting feedback that's telling me I should change, or I should stop, I should do something else with my life. So what do you do when you get those founders who say, well, no, I'm not getting any good feedback that I should actually do the thing, but I just kind of want to anyway, you know?
You can only, in the beginning, you can only pivot the person or the problem. So, and this is like in a vacuum and idealistic, and I totally understand it, and I've been on both sides of this. But theoretically, if you were getting these interventions and you had endless time and you said, no, we're not moving on until you find a problem worth solving. Maybe not until you find a business, but you're not moving on to the next step until you find 10 people that have the problem, know they have the problem, and are actively trying to solve it. I mean, that's a way of like standardizing this that I'm like seeking. I'm not saying it's going to apply, but I at least want to create this framework where it's like, who do I want to understand? What do I want to understand? I want to understand the problem that you're trying to solve, their objectives, their pains and gains, the emotional, social, and I want to understand that stuff. And then I want to stop and take a deep breath and decide if I want to build a business around a social impact project. So all this decision-making comes from assuming you have good data. So assuming you're talking to the right people, well, no, you don't even have to assume you're talking to the right people. Assuming your technique, I'll go back to that. Assuming your technique is good and you're unbiased and you're doing 3 or 5 interviews at a time, if you're not getting the result that you want, you really only have 2 choices. You can iterate on the customer. I think this was a big thing 10 years, like, you know, macro pivots, micro pivots, zoom out pivots, zoom in pivots. There's an article somewhere. I think we even brought it up on this show. So you can either change the segment and zoom in like to a different beachhead market or a different ICP, whatever you want to call it. And this goes back to who are you talking to, which in the beginning is not as, it doesn't matter as much as I thought it did because it's still malleable. And I think someone was even commenting, and I was doing some studying before the time, like I think Ash had posted the idea of this granular and then specific, I forgot the exact terminology, but you're doing like general interviews and then targeted interviews. Yeah, I think this intervention piece and changing, not only evaluating if your technique is good, but if your technique is good and you're not getting the answers you want, you only have 2 choices. You can talk to different people, or you can change your learning objective about the problem. Or you can move on knowing that, like, I don't care, I'm building this thing and that's what I'm doing and I have no evidence, and you can say it out loud and say, I think the market's going to change, or I think there's an opportunity, or I think I think that's perfectly reasonable and something that like pedantic coaches like us have to accept. But at least you don't get to fill in the box that I heard this problem. And I heard them say, like, yes, fine. Some customers might not know and might not be actively trying to solve the problem. But you don't get to fill in the box that says, I heard them say that they have the problem, they acknowledge the problem, they're actually trying to solve it. You can still build something in AI and then say, I'm creating a business, or I'm creating a project, or I'm going to finish the semester and do this thing. But I actually don't think I do think we need to be a little bit more, we have to hold people accountable that, yeah, they don't get to check the box that says, the reason I'm doing this is because I heard in these interviews using the proper technique that they have the problem and are actively trying to solve it. And that to me is true or false. There's other things that are contextual and they change, and you can't necessarily put everyone through the same one. There's different assumptions, but assuming there's a desirability assumption.
Yeah, I would try to think who is another person who has been in that same position, like a peer, and then suggest that how about if you go to talk to that person. And because sometimes if you're the mentor and you're disagreeing with the other person, then bringing in a third person who has gone through the same experience might help and open the eyes, because that has happened to me in the past.
Oh, Jesus. Can you all hear me? I keep buffering. Good. So Paul, a couple of things. As an adjunct professor for entrepreneurship at my local university, the first thing that came to mind, so I'm going to use that as a context. You said, so what do you do about that, particularly for the students? It seems to me if they come back to you, they are in love with the solution and not the problem. Like, first of all, right? Just point blank. And I think that what happens in the university setting is that there is this, there's this assessment thing that goes off in the back of their heads, like, oh, I came in with this, he's going to give me an A, or they're going to not give me an A if I don't follow it out. I try to relieve my students of A's. I'm like, I just need you to come up with, just follow the information, follow the data. What did it tell you? Man, my idea sucked. Cool. Prove it. Here's the data. Cool. You win, because I'm going to save you as a budding entrepreneur a crap ton of money following an idea that has nobody to buy it. Steve Blank, I heard him say this, and I actually talked to him one time. And I said, I heard you say this. And he said, I did? I said, the only thing that matters is what people buy. Everything's a hobby, basically. It's just a hobby. And so if you want a hobby, cool. I tell my students, cool. But this class is to make sure that you get a job, that you end up building something. For my founders, I say, if it costs you more than the value, you have a hobby. Don't get mad. Just understand that the value gets extracted both for the customer and for you is less than the cost of building that thing. Cool. If it's an equal, now you're doing a public service. We need
you have a
people to do
nonprofit.
public service.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because John and I used to work for the U.S. federal government, and the joke was every October 1st, every agency in the federal government became a unicorn because they got their next infusion of $1 billion, right? And their job was to spend down money, and feverishly about mid-August, they would start buying pens and papers and sending people off to conferences because they could not figure out how to do it. And they would, by the way, per person, we talked to seniors and we said, out of $1, how much of his overhead and how much of his mission? And what do you think they said? 80% of everything that they did was overhead. 20% was mission. And our task was to get them to go 50-50. I don't need you to flip it, but do 50-50. For the founders following the data, I want them to figure out how do they make money, because for 1 unit of cost, they need to have like a 2 or 3x return on value. And if they can do that, now they're following the information, not the thing that they think is cool. Who gives a damn if it's cool if ain't nobody buying it? Over.
All right, so we are at time, so let's go around to all our special friends and guests and everything and get one last shot at what their feelings are on the topic of good problem discovery. We'll start with Nakeem.
Wait, so what's the question? I apologize.
Just anything else you didn't get out that you wanted to say on the topic of good problem discovery?
What question should I have asked you?
Yeah, I just want to kind of piggyback off what Ty said. It's really not falling in love with the problem, with the solution, but more so it's the relationship with data, man. And I didn't know that was. I didn't know that was important until I really started doing research myself in anthropology, and you really start to get enmeshed with the data, right? So if a founder is really enmeshed with the data, then they'll listen to what the data says. So in that way, I feel like if they're in love with the solution, but also they are tied with their data closely, then that is kind of gonna weigh a lot heavier, right? Because they're like, okay, this is what the customers are telling me. This is what the person I want to understand is telling me. So yeah, it's almost just like, and now I'm not the one telling them no. I'm like, hey, no, they need to step up. So I like to have that position where I'm like, hey, listen to what your work is saying, and to me that saves me a lot as a coach because I don't have that authority over the data in my life.
Thank you, Nakeem. Think like an anthropologist. I like it.
Definitely.
How about you, Paul? Final thoughts?
Yeah, something that I'd actually like to try. I think there would be a fun way to demonstrate this is to have, say, a two-person team. So they're working on the same concept. But you have one person, one of the founders go out and do interviews with some of this customer discovery training, the other one without it, and then compare results at the end.
Ooh, I like it.
An
experiment.
But there must be only one right answer. So I think, I actually might try to do something like that just to demonstrate, even if it's anecdotal, to demonstrate the differences in, what you think you're learning coming out of these interviews. So, but as a tool of persuasion, I think it might be kind of interesting to try.
Yeah, that'd be really cool to set up as a control group, right? And just make sure they hit they interview the same people. Yeah, that'd be kind of fascinating. Control those variables, but I don't think anyone's ever done that before. That's fascinating. Yep. How about you, Michael?
I want to clarify something I said earlier and then blow it up. I mentioned if you don't qualify a person as an early adopter, why are you interviewing them? But in reality, I don't believe that. I think if I'm stuck in an airplane next to someone who is clearly not an early adopter, what I want to do is qualify what kind of customer they are and then continue to interview them and position the learnings that I get from them and attached to that customer type, because at some point I need to understand the difference in my market between the early adopter and the early majority and what that transition is going to look like so that I can facilitate it. I also want to suggest that many times we focus on too few aspects of the business model canvas in customer discovery phase and then move on once we think we've validated like value proposition and customer segment. Now we're going to move on. But I want to suggest that we can use discovery methods to validate things in almost all blocks of the business model canvas very, very quickly and efficiently. And I want to blow this up by suggesting that customer discovery is a lifestyle choice. This isn't something that we do at one phase in a class during an academic semester. This isn't something that how many entrepreneurs do you know that only have one problem they're passionate about, one idea, and they only want to start one business? At least I think in the circles that we run, that's the minority. And so I have a list of problems that I'm always investigating. And if I meet someone who is an early adopter and I'm engaged in a fascinating conversation because I'm genuinely passionate, like Nakeem was saying, in solving this problem, I have an endless fountain of questions for people that are experiencing it. And I think if you just continue to practice this as a lifestyle and try to discover the problems all around you all the time and continually check in with the literature, go back to Fitzpatrick, go back to Blank, go back to Justin Wilcox, improve your method. Don't think of it as something that is a checkbox along the way. You're going to stumble into some really interesting entrepreneurial opportunities.
Beautiful. Love it. Jack, final thoughts.
Yeah, I like what Michael said. I guess I would just say that get yourself an accountability partner or partners, somebody who's looking at your problem discovery from the outside. Because sometimes if you're working with a team or team to be, you might have like an echo chamber. So just getting this outside view, outside insights. That's my advice.
Awesome. I'll hand it back to you, Adam. Close us out.
I want this group to test Paul's. I wanted to see what would happen. I mean, I don't want to say it's obvious because it's brilliant. I agree, but it's such an elegant solution to bias, right? So I've seen some corporates try to put the actual voice of the customer in front of like a supercut video in front of a decision maker, which we've also been trained. You have to hear it yourself. You can't outsource interviews. But I flipped on that. Yeah, I think you should almost outsource, but for a different reason, so that someone who's not biased is getting different data. And I would love to see this side by side. So that's on the technique. And on the analysis piece, I would love to lock in some sort of decision-making framework that is highly structured, that forces, even after every batch of 2 or 3 or 5 at the most, or 10 interviews at the most, or a week or 2 weeks at the longest, what are you doing next? Changing. It's not just pivot, persevere, like getting more and more granular. I'm changing customer segments because I'm changing my problem because I'm building it. Why? Because one person said they had the problem. Okay. But like really tracking the decision, again, build, measure, learn stuff. But really, I would love to see if a bunch of us, that's also some of the idea behind the monthly call, starts December 9th. Like if a bunch of us, we need Wendy and Jade, and we need some equality on the call. But once we get a group of a panel, yes, like really locking in what did you learn in that surprising piece, and taking the data and then attaching a decision directly to the data, and really having them, their partners look at it, but then also all of us, like, here's your feedback form. This is what the 10 mentors thought of your decision tied to your data. Full stop, not like nothing else. That's what I feel like would be interesting to watch us do once a month or daily when we talk to teams that have done the interviews and have used proper technique.
Fantastic. All right, this has been a great conversation. Could go on for hours, but we're going to wrap it up now because Adam seemed a little disappointed when this ESTJ looked at his watch and said, we're over time. So you know what? We'll get to do it next time. So thank you guys for coming on. This has been fantastic. Enjoyed all the diversity of thought. You guys are awesome. See you all next week.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
gents.
Thank you.